I'm Joe Arnold, president of the Louisville Forum. Welcome to our April meeting. We meet on the second Wednesday of each month at Vincenzo's Restaurant in downtown Louisville, and all are welcome. Founded in 1984, the Louisville Forum is a nonpartisan public issues group that hosts debates and discussions of contemporary and sometimes controversial public policy issues that affect the greater Louisville community. Although we may take up issues that have a national interest, we do highlight the local perspective. For more information on the Louisville Forum, our programs, or to make reservations, please visit louisvilleforum.org. 24 days from today is the 148th running of the Kentucky Derby. It is a global sporting event. It's a civic treasure in our Louisville, and it's had a rough past few years. In 2019, the horse that finished first was disqualified for interference, and its trainer is now under a federal doping indictment. The 2020 Derby was delayed by COVID until September. The winning trainer from that year is now banned. In 2021, the winning horse was later disqualified for a banned substance and actually died in December after training at Santa Anita. So our program today is horse racing's legitimacy at stake at Derby 148. We have an incredible panel. First, a 20-year veteran of the horse racing industry, Ed DeRosa, is Vice President of Content and Product Development at Horse Racing Nation, which each year attracts more than 20 million online visits, 50 million page views, reaching horse players in every state and worldwide. You may also recognize Ed as an on-air analyst and reporter for Churchill Downs, and a writer and editor with Thoroughbred Times. Gene McLean is the founder of the Louisville Thoroughbred Society and the president and publisher of the Pressbox, an online media suite with podcasts, webcasts, news, features, handicapping, and wagering advice. Previously, Gene was an award-winning sports writer and columnist for the Lexington Herald-Leader. He is very well known at the state capitol, where he advocated for many important issues, including priorities of the Kentucky Thoroughbred Association and the Kentucky Thoroughbred Owners and Breeders Association. To my far right, Clark Brewster is Bob Baffert's attorney, representing the all-time Derby-winning trainer as he is currently banned from thoroughbred racing. Based in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Clark is one of the preeminent trial lawyers in the Southwest and has established a national reputation for his work. In civil court, his clients have been awarded multi-million-dollar verdicts in complex medical malpractice, personal injury, and commercial litigation cases. As a defense attorney, Clark has represented clients in many high-profile cases. As an aside, when Stormy Daniels, actually with Clark's help, fired Michael Avenatti as her attorney, she hired Clark to represent her. After Medina Spirit failed a drug test after last year's Kentucky Derby, trainer Bob Baffert reached out to Clark Brewster, who himself is a racehorse owner. His horses have more than 3,000 starts, more than 3,100, right? And has earned more than $12 million in winnings, so he knows the racetrack. Our moderator is award-winning journalist and photojournalist Eric Crawford. You've watched him on WDRB since 2012. Before that, you've read his columns and articles in the Courier-Journal for 12 years and several national publications and bookshelves. Previously worked for newspapers in Evansville, Indiana. Among his many awards is the Red Smith Riding Award for Kentucky Derby coverage. I want to invite our panelists to make opening remarks, and then we'll turn it over to Eric and your questions. And first up, please welcome Ed DeRosa.
Thank you very much. Certainly a pleasure to be here, and spent a lot of time, even before I knew I'd be on this panel, thinking about the question, is horse racing's legitimacy at stake at the Kentucky Derby this year? And I would just say horse racing's legitimacy is at stake, period. It's impossible to deny that the thoroughbred racing and breeding industry in the United States is in the midst of a reckoning, and I hope that you'll pardon the gravitas of this analogy, but as a Catholic, it's something I just can't get away from. I am very much reminded of the angst, inner turmoil, etc., that me and fellow parishioners, etc., all dealt with and still deal with in terms of the scandal that rocked the Catholic Church with relation to priests abusing kids. And I remember how hard, and at times it still is, to go into church and to pray and be spiritual knowing that that occurred. Now, obviously, those crimes are much beyond anything that happens at the track, which is an escape, which is meant to be fun. But in my mind, those things weigh on me similarly. And the Kentucky Derby, to me, is our Easter. We get dressed up, we celebrate. It can be a rebirth, a renewal. And in my mind, that's why I hesitate to say, no, the legitimacy of racing is not at stake at the Kentucky Derby. The Kentucky Derby is supposed to be all that's right about thoroughbred racing and horse racing. It's our main event. It's the one I look forward to most every year. When people say, oh, the Oaks might be a better race, I roll my eyes. There's no better race, no matter what, than the Kentucky Derby. And I see it as a positive that Churchill Downs Incorporated and others in the industry have taken the steps to preserve the legendary status of the race, its esteem. I think it's important that when there is malfeasance, when rules are broken, that there is punishment that goes along with it. And I'm happy that that's occurred. I think when it does happen, there needs to be punishment. Horses need to be disqualified. Horsemen need to take a time out, as I would tell my children. So what happens next? We'll see. I'm very eager to hear the comments of my fellow panelists. One thing I am for certain, even though we might have disagreements, we are aligned in wanting to see racing do well. I'm actually the only panelist who does not own horses, so it's great to be on a panel with people who are involved in the sport. I make my involvement known other ways, which is through the wagering windows. I love it. It's one of the greatest puzzles in the world, and I definitely don't want to see it go away, not only for me, but for future generations. It's a great sport, but yes, its legitimacy is at stake.
Thank you for the invitation to be here. Joe and I go way back many years. He's much younger. He started when he was 10, I think, in the profession. But I do appreciate the invitation to be here. I want to congratulate Ed on his new job and new responsibilities at Horse Racing Nation. Ed and I are more recent friends, and I admire not only his work ethic, but the things he brings to the table and all of his ideas, although he's often wrong. And I have to remind him of that from time to time. But he handicaps and I handicap, and we try to team up on some bets because I know that his picks are going to lose, and I have to bring the ticket more credibility. So anyway, I do want to say in my bio that I am a co-founder of the Louisville Thoroughbred Society. I have two other partners that joined with me in that endeavor. I am not here speaking on their behalf as the Louisville Thoroughbred Society. I'm here, I don't know if I'm speaking on behalf of Gene McLean or not. I think that Scott will correct me at the end and let me know if I'm speaking on behalf of Gene McLean or not. But to the question itself, Joe, and others, is the legitimacy of racing at question is a much different question than is the legitimacy of the Kentucky Derby at question. And I look at it as two very distinctly different dialogues and discussions, because I think Ed hit on some points that are very legitimate from the industry's perspective, Clark, and you mentioned some in our pre-conversations that I think are legitimate. The foal crop reduction is a concern. Racetracks that have been valuable and viable members of the racetrack community are struggling to fill races. Those are concerns. Is it a crisis? I think that every opportunity like this gives us an opportunity to fix. And I would love to see the foal crop increase in those regards. But I want to target most of my remarks about is the Kentucky Derby's legitimacy at question. And I think it's probably at the zenith of its credibility going into this spring, because of the actions that they've taken, which I think are correct, in echoing on some of Ed's comments. The decision of the stewards in the issue with maximum security, I think, was the absolute right decision. There was a foul committed in that race, and the stewards were placed in that position of making that decision. I think it held the credibility of the Kentucky Derby. What happened with the Kentucky Derby the following year to have the COVID situation arise, I give great credit to Churchill Downs for finding the way to make the Derby happen in September. a continuous, if you look back in your history, how many events have gone on for 147 years in a row? I mean, it's amazing. And, you know, that's something to be very, very proud of if you're the custodian of Churchill Downs and the Kentucky Derby. The unfortunate incident that happened after the 2021 Derby, and I call it unfortunate. I remember getting the text the morning of that there was a rumor going around that a horse had tested positive. And I was at the lake, at my lake house, because after Derby, you kind of take a little break. And I said, oh my God. I said, please tell me it's not the Derby winner. And they came back, the rumor is it's the Derby winner. And I remember, and I went back and looked at my text as I prepared for this, Joe, and I said, damn to hell. Nobody wants that ever to happen, ever. It's not good for us. It's not good for the city. It's not good for Kentuckians. It's not good for anybody in the sport of horse racing. The Kentucky Derby means so much to all of us, especially those of us that were born and raised in Kentucky. It's part of us. If you ever are touched by anything in your life, you're touched by the Kentucky Derby because of the money that it generates. It touches all of us. It touches the servers, it touches the hotel workers, it touches the gas attendants. It touches everybody from Pikeville to Paducah. And for anything to happen in the Kentucky Derby, touches us all. But the credibility and the legitimacy of the Derby, I think, has never been higher because of the acts of Bill Carstangen, of Bill Mudd, of Mike Ziegler, of Mike Armstrong, and the hierarchy that made the decision in Kentucky to uphold the integrity of the race and discipline those that were responsible for that question is paramount to not only restoring or continuing to, the history of the Kentucky Derby, but also the credibility of that event. That concludes my opening remarks. I probably went over, Joe, so.
My name's Clark Brewster, and I want to thank Joe for inviting me here today to have a brief conversation. I'm a trial lawyer. I've been practicing law for over 40 years, and I'm also involved in the thoroughbred industry, and I'm a breeder and owner. I have been involved pretty significantly in multiple states, so it's very near and dear to my heart. I have appeared, although this is not my central area of practice, I've appeared in regulatory rule matters involving horsemen in Delaware, New Jersey, New York, Arkansas, Iowa, Minnesota, Texas, Florida, and I've had the opportunity to really understand the rules of racing, how they came about, medication rules of racing. I'm very familiar with the Association of Commissioners, Racing Commissioners International proposed rules, as well as the RMTC, which is the Racing Medication Testing Consortium, which is the academic wing that goes into the foundation of rules of racing. And so I stand here with some industry knowledge, some lawyer knowledge, and also rule knowledge. And it's nice to say that we're all against a rule violator, or especially something in the Kentucky Derby. But what is necessary is substance and fact. And Mr. Carstangen was complimented by these two gentlemen for taking action. But he took the action without even a simple meeting, without even an opportunity to have a conversation. I tried numerous times, as did Mr. Baffert, just can we sit down and talk and tell you how this came about and how this is not a rule violation. It was rebuffed. Just a ban, 2-year ban. Unprecedented, never happened before to any trainer without even a hearing, without even an opportunity to have a discussion. So I think, I wish I could tell you the sage that said this, but it's very, very apropos. The lowest form of expressed knowledge is mere opinion. The highest form is genuine empathy. What happened in connection with a Medina Spirit, if you think that is a black mark, it's the reaction that the industry took in cannibalizing itself that is the black mark. He reacted to a positive as a result of a beta-methazone product that was applied to the skin. It's not a rule violation. It's permitted by Kentucky rules. without question, the rule for betamethasone is a 14-day stand-down period for intra-articular injections. But as this came out, and the media, as well as people like these industry people, believed there was a violation, there was no turning back. Not for the commission, not for any court. And we're in a situation now where it's being appealed, and people say, well, just take what the lower court or the lower commission said. When I deposed this Chief Stewart in this case, I said, you're acting as if the betamethasone positive at 21 picograms, which is 1 trillionth. If you live to be 32,000 years old, it'd be 1 second of your life. You're acting as if that's a violation. And the answer was, well, a level of detection is the rule. But it's not stated that way. And when I questioned her about that, she said she thought it was. We looked at the rules, and she said, I guess it isn't, but I wish it was. That's her sworn testimony. So we have a situation here where this is spread across not only this country, but internationally, the condemnation of Bob Baffert. Wrong. Absolutely wrong. In 29 years, he had a single medication positive in Kentucky. In New York, 0. We've gone off on a narrative, and nobody's come back to try to understand the facts. I have great respect for Gene here, but I don't think he could articulate a single rule of the Kentucky Rules of Racing, nor perhaps Ed either. If you can, tell me what KAR 810-20-2 says about betamethasone or corticosteroids. I suggest you won't know. So we have a situation here where now Churchill has gone out and made this ban. It's a black mark on the industry, not for what the ban was based upon, by the fact that the ban was made without even an opportunity to have a discussion. So I look forward to engaging in the questions you may have and responding to them directly. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I just feel like I should just go on out in the hallway and let them have it out right now up here, but I'll give you a short minute to cool off and think about it. I think in December I'll have been in journalism for 30 years, and from the day I got into journalism, I think we've been talking about the future of horse racing, or the health of horse racing, or today the integrity of horse racing. And I like today's topic because there's one key number that I would tell you about the Kentucky Derby, and that's 16 million. It's the one horse race in America that can bring 16 million people to television sets to watch it. That's still a respectable number in American sports. It's still a pretty major number for a sport like horse racing, which has seen other numbers decline over the years. I think horse racing, as I look at it, I think it's had a lot of opportunities in the last couple of years. I think there's some good things happening with it. The Horse Racing Integrity Safety Act, I think for the first time, maybe ever, you see some national uniformity of what the rules are going to be, how they're going to be enforced. I think that's a great opportunity for the sport, and I think it opens up some possibilities. I think we see a lot of medication changes happening in stakes races, the Kentucky Derby, running without Lasix. These are good developments. But the other time-honored horse racing tradition that I've seen is that the sport can't get out of its own way, and it has not been able to with the Kentucky Derby in the last few years. Whatever happens in the Derby becomes a national conversation piece. If 8 Bells breaks down in the Kentucky Derby, we're going to have a national conversation about horse safety. If a horse is disqualified, which we all understand, if we're horse racing fans, we see it every week. We see it every day. We see a horse DQ'd, a foul's committed in a race. Those 16 million people on TV may wonder what the heck's going on. We just watched a horse win the race and he didn't win the race. How does that happen? They don't understand. A lot of them, we're all keeping track. We see what Clark says every time there's a court ruling on Bob Baffert. We know exactly what's happening and we're following it. I would wager that people around the nation aren't. A lot of them will find out when they tune into the Kentucky Derby this year that Bob Baffert has horses in the Kentucky Derby by virtue of other trainers, but he is not there, and they'll find out why, and they'll wonder what's going on. So there's a lot of things that happen with the Kentucky Derby that have a national impact on the sport. Maybe in a negative way, it's not as well able, I don't think, to drag fans in except on Derby Day. So there are opportunities maybe there for the sport to use the Derby in a more positive way. But I think it's a fascinating time. I think it's, when we start to look at is the integrity of the sport at stake in this year's Derby. I think it's probably the same as every other year. It's always at stake in the Kentucky Derby. The Derby has great potential to create a negative discussion, and it has a great opportunity that maybe has not always taken advantage of to generate positive influence on the sport. We're going to hear some, I guess, about the state of the sport. There's a contraction going on in horse racing, fewer tracks, fewer horses, fewer farms as they close down. Some of this is just the economy. Some of it is stuff that we may see, you know, in terms of just fans moving in other ways. Some of these problems are sports that other sports are having too. I mean, baseball has a problem there, and we don't really talk about the legitimacy of baseball, but it has some of the same issues. So I'm looking forward to some of the things that you folks have to say. You've touched on some things. I guess where I would like to start, I'll have to go back since Clark is here, and I really appreciate you being here, because it's not always that an attorney for somebody that's, you know, in the legal process will show up and talk to us. But I would want to get a little bit more into this, is that how much do we think what the actions of Churchill Downs have to do with the actual substance of the violations that happened, and how much do we think this bigger climate played into it, of a sport that needs to address substance issues within its sport, and the opportunity with the biggest name in the sport to make a point and make a stand, and really how much is that going to be a part of the narrative of this year's race? And I'll let you guys, he addressed you both. I don't know which one of you would like to talk, but let's go ahead and start that off.
Well, first, I'd like to say I think if either Gene or I were on the same hourly pay schedule as Mr. Brewster, we'd be happy to memorize the KHRC regulations. The onus is not on us to know those to the letter, but I certainly appreciate that he does, and he's doing his job, which we all are. That's why we're here. As for the question of the panel and the comments that we all three made, I feel like it's not our place to adjudicate what's going on between Baffert, KHRC, and Churchill Downs. As an executive at Horse Racing Nation, I'm much more interested in the overall question of the legitimacy of racing, and it's interesting to me that I kind of approach it as, yes, when there is adjudication and follow-up and disqualifications because of malfeasance, to me that adds to the integrity and racing. And when Mr. Brewster spoke, and I understand from the point of view of his client, without Bob Baffert there, does that risk the legitimacy of the Derby? Will people say, well, how is he not there? This must not be the race it always is. I disagree with that. I understand the point, but overall, I'm hoping for a healthier industry.
Yeah, and I don't think that this probably is the format for us to discuss the technicalities of the legal arguments. Not being a practicing barrister and not having gone to law school, I will acquiesce to the George Thackers and the Clark Brewsters and the other attorneys in the room for opinion as to the legal, the technicalities. The thing is I think important to remember here is that the test came back positive. In racing, we have what we call a split sample, meaning that the trainer then has the opportunity to take a split sample of the same blood that was tested in the original test and send it to his own or her own laboratory to be tested as well. That secondary test, which I'm not certain of, but I would think that Mr. Baffert and Mr. Brewster chose the laboratory, the secondary laboratory. He's shaking his head no. But the secondary laboratory confirmed the first test, that it was a positive. And so there then becomes a process of how that is to be going through the Kentucky Racing Commission. I've spent 30 years in front of the Kentucky Racing Commission. In my former life, I was the executive vice president of Kentucky Thoroughbred Association and Kentucky Thoroughbred Owners and Breeders. I became the first president of Kentucky off-track betting after, at that time, Governor Brereton Jones passed a bill to enable off-track betting. He and others asked if I would take over that responsibility, and I did. And we put 4 OTBs in within a couple of years. And then I practiced a lobbying profession in Frankfurt for 30 years, and at every juncture along that way, I represented someone in the thoroughbred industry. I've had a lot of experience before the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission. It's been called a lot of different things. The governor, when they come in, would always disband it and create a new one. But this Kentucky Racing Commission, in my view, is probably the most professional, the most dedicated to the intricacies of the law, and I think have practiced great restraint in terms of checking every box along the way. The current chairman of the Kentucky Racing Commission is a trial attorney, practices the same law that you do, Mr. Brewster. And so Mr. Rabinowitz is the lead attorney for head of the Morgan & Morgan in Kentucky. And Mr. Rabinowitz is a friend of mine. He's also an acquaintance of mine. But I also have great respect for his practice of law and his learning of the law. I will tell you this without question, without any question, the executive director of this racing commission is the best in the country and the best in the industry. I've known Mark Guilfoyle for over 40 years. The most integrity that I've ever witnessed in another professional that I've ever come across in my entire life, from personal experience, Joe. So when you start to put together what the timeline of and what actually occurred was that there was a positive and there was a secondary test that was confirmed the positive, and then the process began. And whether or not Churchill Downs waited for that process to go through due process all the way to fruition, which, if you remember, there's only been 2 disqualifications for a drug positive in the history of the Derby. The other one was 1968 with Dancer's Image. That Mr. Fuller processed that case for years. I think it went 4 years. So if you're going to have rules, there has to be some disciplinary action, I think, in place. And the last thing I'll say, because I know Mr. Brewster is anxious and already willing to comment, is that this is not the first time this has happened in Kentucky with the same barn operation. It happened a couple of years ago with Gamine in the Kentucky Oaks. There was a positive. There was a confirmation. There was a due process. There was a penalty provision. And so you start, if your child repeatedly does something, the discipline has to come in place at some point. And if they don't learn, then the penalties become aggressively higher. That's my opinion, and that's what I think the Kentucky Racing Commission and Churchill Downs authorities did in this case.
I assume Clark.
Oh, wow. Could we have a couple hours on that? First of all, Mr. McLean, there are 30-some medications on the medication control list that can be in the horse on race day that would test, any one of which is not a violation, okay? So betamethasone is one of them. Betamethasone is permitted to be used intra-articular injections. It's no surprise the split came back with a 20 picogram positive. Nobody's disputing that. The issue is, what was the route of administration? Did the route of administration cause a violation? The answer is no, because it's only regulated on intra-articular. So when the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission said you can have a split sample, we knew that the urine itself would disclose whether the components of the salve was present or the injectable. So we said, could you send the urine too? No. Well, wouldn't you want to have more information before you made a decision? We're not going to do it. They wouldn't send the urine for a split. I always believe that more information results in a better decision. So they wouldn't do it, so ultimately the urine was sent to the New York testing lab after we had to sue and get a court order. Lo and behold, the test came back that it was the salve, not the regulated injectable. Everyone went down the wrong road, but they didn't have enough character and integrity to turn around and start at their destination again. That's the problem. And so what's happened here is nobody will sit back and say, what happened? Is this right? Is this a rule violation? It's not a rule violation. There's a specific rule. It's actually, I think it's 8010 section 24,
that deals with corticosteroids, and it says corticosteroids, betamethasone, Vetalog, triamcinolone, and it's phenylbutyl, or it's methyl, it's Depomedrol's the trade name. If it has a level of detection of more than 1, it's a violation. There wasn't more than 1. This was a salve. There was 1 at a very low level. So after the narrative got sprung and Mr. Karstanjian came out days after the Derby and issued this big ban and you can't get points, nobody then could be reeled back in and said, wait a minute, this is wrong. This is wrong. Let's listen to the facts and apply the rules. When you take the deposition, incidentally, Mr. Rabinowitz and none of the commission has made any rulings here. We've never been in front of him other than on a stay. So he's not had a substantive opportunity. I hope you are correct. I hope when he sees and this is adjudicated, he said, wait a minute. There's never too late to right a wrong and do the right thing. You mentioned priests. Some of them were not guilty, but were accused. We don't put them all and say they're all guilty until we look at the facts. So that in and of itself. So what happened after this came out? Remember Saturday Night Live with the big interview on Dateline saying that muscle building and it's Mark McGuire? A corticosteroid is an anti-inflammatory, not an anabolic steroid. We've all used corticosteroids. They're in salves, they're in topicals, they're ubiquitous in our culture. This is not a violation. Incidentally, when the salve was dispensed, it's about the size of a chapstick, it was reported to the Jockey Club and reported to the California Horse Racing Board. When the Kentucky Racing Commission came after the positive to inspect
Was
the
it
bar,
not reported to Bob? Because he got in front of cameras after the positive and said there was no salve.
That's right. No, he didn't say that. What he said was, we never injected this horse. Nobody even.
No.
It's there. That's not what he said.
Okay. He said we didn't use
He
betamethasone.
said he's never had that product in his barn ever.
Well, sir, he did not inject the horse, and betamethasone in a salve is permitted. There's no question about it. Everyone was
That's not true, Clark. That's not true, and it will be a court decision on how the administration of the drug, whether it is defined as an injectable as the offense. You're talking
Sir,
about
sir,
the trigger
sir.
being the injectable.
No, sir.
The fact of the matter is that court will decide that, right?
Hold on.
Correct.
I
Just
hope-
answer my question, yes or no. Will the
No.
court decide that question?
So do I get?
I'm
hold on.
asking you.
No, hold on.
Okay.
The agency makes the decision, and then if they don't make the correct one, it's appealed. Hold on.
Correct. So now it's before the
Sir,
Kentucky
sir,
Court of
sir,
Appeals.
Sir, listen.
Correct or no?
I'm sorry?
Is it now before the Kentucky Court of Appeals?
No, only on the stay. It has nothing to do with the substance of the case.
Okay. Then the substance
Can I-
of the
will I
case
be
is
permitted
where?
to finish? I want to respond to one
Finish
more
your
comment.
statement, yeah.
All right, yeah.
Well-
So the point is, the topical has a completely different route of administration. The bioavailability of the product in the topical is like 1% versus an injectable. For example, hold on. The World Anti-Doping Administration has extensive literature on this. The route of administration of a topical is just, it's nonsense to regulate it. They've made that very clear. Okay, now you want to talk about HISA? Somebody mentioned HISA, which is the Horse Racing Integrity Act. What is the screening for betamethasone on HISA? 20 or 200 picograms. 200 picograms. This wouldn't even be a violation in the most rigid regulation.
I'd like to back it up just to the
Let's- yeah,
general
let's-
question of legitimacy because,
Well, yeah.
and I
we could
appreciate
go.
Mr.
We could go on Baffert.
Well, I appreciate the defense, and
We
it's
could
an
go a lot
important
longer than
discussion, but I think a lot of our peers, yourself included, I would guess, certainly Gene with members at the club, people he knows, myself, the biggest question I get is why are drugs in the horse's system at all? And when it comes to the legitimacy of racing and selling it, especially to a younger generation who may be more in tune to horse welfare issues, and I am not asking this question because I think, oh, don't give horses any. I get it. I understand. I'm with both of you. I know that to have a competitive athlete, there are certain things that should be allowed under the care of a vet, a accomplished horseman, husbandry, etc. But the question I get the most is why are they on drugs at all? And that's the
Okay,
point blank.
can I answer
So
that?
when we have this discussion and we're arguing for why they need this, why they need that, to me, that's what might hurt the legitimacy of racing.
Well-
And it's not necessarily fair, but that is the reality.
Okay, I think you raise an excellent point that needs to be addressed, and that is there's been a lot of scientific, tireless work done in what medications are palliative and appropriate for the care, for the husbandry, and the clinical diagnosis by a vet for a horse and every day. They kick a stall, they get a quarter crack, they have a cut, they have a lesion, they get cast in the stall. What can we do to make sure that they're comfortable and not in pain and taken care of? And so there's a wide range of medications called medication control therapeutic medications. Kentucky has a long list, 30 plus, including betamethasone. So these drugs are totally appropriate to use. And incidentally, they can be in the horse on race day. Acepromazine, albuterol, omeprazole. I can go down, lidocaine, all appropriate to be in the horse on race day. Now, the public doesn't know that. They say, well, you can have drugs in horses. Yes, you can, under certain rules and regulations.
And thresholds.
Betamethasone being one, and betamethasone was appropriately administered according to the Kentucky rules, fully disclosed. Incidentally, when they did the search of the barn, the bottle was there. Nobody even took issue with it.
What was the threshold, Clark?
The threshold is not expressed. It's a time rule.
Did the test come back positive for an overage of the drug that is in question?
No. No, it did not.
Let me say this. Let me say this.
Do you want to know why?
No, I want to say this. You've brought up a lot of things that question the integrity of the decision. I may disagree that I'm intoxicated at 08. If I have a drink or two, I may get behind the wheel of a car, and I may disagree that I'm impaired to drive at 08.
Well, you're a bad person then.
I don't do it.
I would never do that.
Well, me either.
All right.
And the fact of the matter is, I never have.
Okay.
And if you want to drive or go have a drink with me, I will never drive. But there are those that would argue that 08 is an arbitrary sum,
Sir, you're
and is not the legal limit for all those, whether they be 240 pounds or 120 pounds. Where this becomes a legitimate argument, it is not for you to decide, or Bob Baffert to decide, what is the legal limit of a drug in a horse's
You
system.
are correct.
It is for the Kentucky Racing Commission
100%.
to decide that limit.
That's why.
And when that test comes back over that limit,
It didn't.
well, then you have you got a breaking story.
No.
Yeah,
No.
oh, yeah.
Okay,
Oh,
hold on,
yeah,
sir.
you do.
Let me explain something
Do
to
one
you.
response to this, and then I want to get.
All right, this is important because he raises a good point. So you have this medication control, therapeutic medications, and on the list it expresses exactly how you can use it and not use it, and it lists thresholds. The thresholds are either expressed in nanograms, picograms, or level of detection, limit of detection, very specifically. If you exceed those thresholds or that limit of detection as expressed, that's a violation of Kentucky rules. When it comes to corticosteroids, it does not state a limited detection. It states a time rule, and it says you shall not give betamethasone injectable, and it exactly describes it, within 14 days of the race. That is the rule. Now, if you tested positive outside a limit of detection, then they could say that is evidence you gave an injection within 14 days. That is the rule. But it didn't happen that way because there was no injection. It's been proven there's no injection. And so when I asked the chief steward, is there a level of detection for betamethasone? She didn't know. She looked and she said, no, I wish there were. You are correct. You can't hold somebody penally responsible without an express rule. You are correct.
Let me say this in response. Let me ask two questions, Clark. One is the urine that was tested in New York was supposed to be saved for a split sample as well, according to the court ruling. There shouldn't be expired. Was there ever a split sample on the urine test that was taken to New York? That's number one. Number two is the only person that has stated publicly that the test was not done through an injection was the person in the New York lab. That person,
That's not true.
Nobody else tested the urine that I know of.
Isn't that a problem? So you raise another great issue. I wish you were testifying. And that is, so when the urine was sent to New York to determine whether it contained the components of the salve or was it the injectable, Kentucky Horse Racing Commission demanded the right to be present when it was split and so they could get their own sample. I hired a private jet to fly them up there so that can get accomplished. And then they took their sample. I said, did you test it too to see if it had the components of salve? No. They didn't test it. They didn't test the sample they demanded to receive for a reason, because they know it is the salve. Okay?
I had hoped that we could save the urine discussion until everybody's done eating, but
No lemonade.
I clearly have failed in
No,
that.
you're doing a great job.
I've seen some scribbling going on. I want to get to your questions, probably more relevant than what I have to ask, but I'm glad to hear. Let's have some of your questions. Start with you. Go ahead.
Sure. And this is sort of a more global question that dovetails with a lot of other questions that we've received. Should there be a national commissioner to oversee the racing industry with uniform enforcement? And to piggyback on that, with all the different interests at stake, would that even be feasible? And that's for all the panelists.
I'll be very quick, yes.
No.
That's already in place. In fall of 2020, it was passed, the Horse Racing Integrity Act, which would create a czar-like overseeing, like the baseball commissioner situation for racing. Bob Baffert has been a strong advocate of it. Yes.
We agree.
Some agreement. Good. Yes, I mean, national standards are huge, and that's one thing this Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act brings is an umbrella over a lot of these states. The hard thing with horse racing, like boxing, some of these other sports, they're all governed by state statutes in 30 different states, and there's nothing to bring them all together. So we finally have some kind of federal action to do that that's only just kind of clicking in over the last year, this year, next year. So that'll be interesting to watch.
This question is it's for all the panelists, and it's focused on Medina Spirit, the horse itself. It said, taking Bob Baffert out of this for a second, should Medina Spirit have been disqualified? One of the issues with that is that it didn't seem like Medina Spirit got any competitive advantage, even if it tested positive.
May I respond? You're exactly correct. So one of the things that goes out in this industry is the absolute insurer rule for trainers, or this idea that the trainers are responsible for everything in the horse. And in this instance, that's the basis for Bob being accused here. But they've all admitted in depositions that there was no improvement of the horse. 21 picograms of betamethasone, even if it weren't a salve, would not have any impact among professionals across the board. So certainly, how is it fair to an owner to take away that win? And I mean, Mr. Zidane wanted to donate the winnings to charity even. I mean, he simply, it's unfair for them to take the win away from Medina Spirit, a $1,000 sale horse, an incredible story, and to take it away is off.
Well, it's still an incredible story. Maybe not for the right reasons, but I actually do think there's an effect. That's why these rules are in place. I think psychologically, when we think performance enhancing or why certain drugs are illegal, we think, oh, they're going to have a rocket booster on their back and just turn away the competition. It's not necessarily about what happens in the race, although sometimes that is in play. It's about training methods. It's about being able to mask injuries so that horses can train through it. As these gentlemen will tell you who own horses, it's extremely difficult to get a horse in the gate, let alone break its maiden, let alone win a stakes race, let alone win the Kentucky Derby, the most prestigious race in the world. Everything needs to go right. And part of the edge you get from breaking rules is you're able to train on Monday morning. When you miss training, you don't win a race. Empire Maker is a great example. He had some foot issues. They still ran him in the Derby. A healthy Empire Maker in 2002 beats Funny Side 90 out of 100 times. But that year, he had some issues. He had to train through it. Maybe if Bobby Frankel had pushed the envelope a little bit more, he would have been able to win. So it's not about performance enhancement in those 2 minutes. It's about performance enhancement throughout the horse's entire career, and that's why these rules are in place. Obviously, Mr. Brewster feels it did not impact performance at any stage of the horse. I'm going to trust the science and say that's why we have these rules, and it was a worthy disqualification.
I'll go a step further. It not only should have been disqualified, and rightfully so, I would be in favor of extending the absolute insurer rule to include the owner, and that the owner should be penalized as well. If the owner became more engaged with whom was training their horses and was more engaged with what the penalty for that trainer would be for coming up with these types of situations and being more involved with the process, then probably there would be less likelihood of these things occurring in the future. So I would be even further extending the absolute insurer rule to include penalties for the owners as well.
Earlier Gene had said, if your child does something wrong, you deal with them. If your child is Bob Baffert and something was in the Kentucky Derby, I think we're not talking about maybe this issue if it happens in some other race. So we're back to kind of the magnitude of the Derby and what it can mean for horse racing.
Well, it happened 8 months previous in the Oaks.
Yeah,
so
and it had already
we didn't
happened.
talk about it.
Yes,
So,
right.
It happened before that in the Arkansas, down in Arkansas too.
Both
So-
reversed.
Yeah. And
This
you'll
next
get to
this
those,
next
I'm
question is
sure.
for all the panelists. Why not simply only allow independent state veterinarians to medicate horses at the track and require horses to arrive 7 to 14 days prior to the racetrack? Would that eliminate any discrepancy over medicine administered?
I'll actually demur and say that's way out of my scope, but the answer to everything around that's usually money, but I have no idea.
Well, there's a certain level of clinical care that's required by a patient physician, and you just can't have a generic regulatory vet assume that particular role. So I don't think that would work. But I do think it's important to talk about what happens in everyday life with regard to drugs and systems is we're all carrying drugs in our system right now, every one of us. They did a study where they tested 300 people in an office setting in New York, just a staff, and 197 tested positive for cocaine. No, 197 people weren't using cocaine. It's ubiquitous. And so once we say we get to a picogram level and it's a violation, do they fire those 197 people? No, we look at common sense. So what HISA has done is they've set screening limits and said, listen, below this level, this is completely irrelevant. It's noise. And in this instance, betamethasone is 200 picograms because it's noise. It has no impact. It can come, probably the horse licked the salve or laid in straw and ate some straw or hay. It has no consequence to the performance of the horse. Now, we have to clinically treat horses. So if you got a lesion on the horse, and this happens a lot on the girt of a horse or the hip of a horse, it's communicated through the sweat and tack of a horse to another, you treat it. That's the humane thing to do. And that's what happened here, and it was timely, contemporaneously reported.
Yeah, and I think there are legitimate therapeutics, but the whole question about them now is, what is therapeutic to treat a horse, and what makes a horse pain-free to extend himself maybe further or herself further than she should, and that's kind of the debate right now in horse racing. There are horses that need Lasix, that really do need it. You see them coming off the track. If you ever seen one that didn't have it and bleeding from the nose and all that, but do they need it to the point where it makes them run harder, that they do more damage to themselves? I think that's a big part of it. Go ahead, Gene.
Yeah, Eric, I just wanted to add to the question. I do think there's a hybrid that could be worked out between the state veterinarian's office and the administration of drugs. I do not think any drug should be in a barn of any trainer, that they do not and should never administer drugs. The veterinarian, I do think that a trainer should have the right to retain a veterinarian of their choice, but when drugs are administered, whether therapeutic or not, should be cleared, and a master schedule of that be kept with the state vet's office at the racetrack itself. Now, how does that apply to training centers? I think that you can extend that to training centers as well. But I think that there's a hybrid model that could work there, and that we should track medications. There are obviously reasons to therapeutically medicate horses. They do injure themselves accidentally in the stall and on the racetrack. And so, and not all of those injuries are either life-threatening or career-threatening. So you have to treat them all individually with therapeutic medications. However, those medications should never be in a tack room at the disposal of the staff of a trainer who has no training whatsoever in how to administer those. And a veterinarian should be on call and one at the racetrack at all times to do those emergency types of situations.
Pure nonsense, all right? So you have to worm horses. We can't have wormer. You can't use liniments. You can't use Regimate. You can't use salves. You can't use poultice. That's nonsense. It shows that you've never been around a barn where horses are cared for and treated. That is nonsense.
Well,
I've seen Gene around barns. I can kind of
Thank you.
attest to that. But that's one of the most asked questions that I've heard in the course of all this is, why can't they quarantine these horses, you know, a day before the race, test them all, make sure they're clean when they get to the into the gate, especially for a stakes like race like the Kentucky Derby or these big races that we're talking about. We got 10 minutes, so let's get through as many as we can.
Well, I don't know if this is going to temper things at all, but is Bob Baffert good for the sport? Are there any other sports that has banned one of their biggest stars and actually benefited the sport? Horse racing needs stars or villains for that matter for more attention.
Who wants to
Can
go
I address
first?
that? My answer to that is horse racing needs horses, and the people will come and go. You want the people to be charismatic, and we've seen Dwayne Lucas kind of go through this life cycle. When I was coming of age in racing, late 90s, early 2000s, Dwayne was somewhat of a pariah at times. He called the media cockroaches. He was the victim. He had a feud with Jenny Reese of the Courier-Journal, who's one of the absolute best to ever do it. And things cooled down. He took his medicine. I don't know what happened, but now he's, in his octogenarian state, he's back on top and well-loved. And, to me, that is because he's shown a love for the horse. People see him on horseback early in the mornings at 80 years old, et cetera. But it all comes back to the horses for me, and I think for many people who truly love this sport, even the gamblers like me, I mean, that's why I like it. I definitely prefer the front side and betting on them than being on the back side. But it's always the horse. And, this racing needs Baffert or Brad Cox or Julian Leperoux, jockey trainer, whoever. I don't buy it. It's the horses for me and many others.
Just briefly, I've come to know Bob, so when you pull the curtains back and really get to know a person, I've been to his barn, I've talked to his help, I've interviewed his vets. This is an outstanding man. He's been selfless, he's been generous, he's never been asked to do anything by Churchill or Saratoga or New York that he hasn't done. He's paraded his horses, he's come early. Matter of fact, when he ships in, they have guards, immediate security guards, placed on all of his horses. He's actively involved in pre-race testing to make sure that everything is right, and he did pre-test Medina. There were no issues. No, Bob is a person that every once in a while in an industry is outsized, and he is iconic and immediately recognized. He's in the Hall of Fame. He's in the Walk of Fame at Saratoga. He's won 7 Kentucky Derbies. He's won 2 Triple Crowns. I mean, he's a remarkable caretaker. And the one thing about Bob I can tell you right now, going through this, he just believes that justice will be right, that in the end they'll get the decision right. And I keep telling him it's going to happen. What we've had so far is a closed shop that started with Churchill issuing its edict and then not having any ability to have any communication. In the end, when a fair judge listens to the evidence, he's going to be fine. But how's the damage repaired? How do you put the toothpaste back in the tube then? I don't know. I think there'll be another chapter of Bob Baffert.
I think Ed's point is right on target. I was very good friends. My grandfather was very good friends with Woody Stevens. Woody Stevens won 5 straight Belmont Stakes, and I don't care who you are, that'll never be duplicated in the history of the sport. One of the best people I've ever known in my life. But if you ask people today, if they go to the racetrack, do you remember Woody Stevens? And the fact is that they don't. The vast majority of them never heard of Woody Stevens. And the fact of the matter is, what will persevere is the Kentucky Derby. And what will persevere is the legitimacy of that event and what it means to every person who is born and raised. And I've made my own poultice, Mr. Brewster. I know what poultice is. I probably pulled more mares out of babies out of mares than you have.
I don't think so.
And well, we can debate it. But the fact
Just from your earlier comments, I conclude that you don't.
Well, the fact of the matter is whether or not Bob Baffert is good for the game or not is immaterial. What's good for the game is a fair, equitable, and legitimate race where Gene McLean can take a $5,000 mare, breed it to a $10,000 stallion, and put it in the starting gate of the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, which I did, and be able to compete against the Queen of England, the Sheikh of Dubai. And if it hadn't gotten stopped at the 8th pole, we would have won. I claimed that mare for $5,000 out at the fairgrounds. Now, what other major league sport, Joe, can that happen? I can't own the New York Yankees. I can't own the Los Angeles Lakers, although they'd both be better off with if I did. But yeah. But the fact of the matter is that no other sport will allow you to do that. And that's what will persevere. That's what will be legitimate for my grandkids and those that come after them.
If I could, Gene, as we wrap up here, Clark, if I have one president's prerogative question here, if I could, as far as what's still at stake. You're trying to reverse Bob Baffert's suspension. Are you still trying to get Medina Spirit's Derby win reinstated?
Well, so let me give you procedurally. We simply had a stewards hearing, and the stewards hearing was a few hours. And so they issued a ruling, and then that is appealed to an administrative law judge. He makes recommendations, and we go in front of the commission. If the commission, whatever ruling they make, if it's not appealed by either us or the KHRC, then it'll be final. Otherwise, it'll go to a court. So that's where we are. We haven't had a hearing yet. So when he talks about the commission and all their goodwill, we've not even had a hearing. So other than the steward's ruling.
On behalf of the entire Louisville Forum, let's thank our panelists and Eric Crawford for being here today. I look forward to seeing a lot of the media coverage of this as well as we flush some of this out. Our next meeting is Wednesday, May 11th, the 3rd Congressional District Democratic primary debate between Representative Attica Scott and Morgan McGarvey. Become a forum member to guarantee a seat. Reservations can be made online at louisvilleforum.org or by calling our voicemail 329-0111. Thank you. Good afternoon.